My name is Venkat Ayadevara, and I'm a program manager in the Outlook Office 365 ecosystem team. My team owns the APIs, which many of you here probably use to build line of business applications. A bunch of our partners also develop enterprise applications, which many of you may be consuming. And
hello everyone, my name is Deepak Singh. I'm a program manager in the Outlook ecosystem team as well.
And what we're going to talk about is how you can leverage the APIs we have, the modern APIs, REST APIs, to build really powerful applications, also build in some intelligence, also make it much easier, kind of drive your users' productivity. So let me get going. The things we'll cover here is, first I'll give you an overview of the APIs. In the past, we have shipped some APIs. Those APIs still exist. Web services, Exchange Web Services is an example. How many of you have heard of Exchange Web Services? Great. And since then, we've also shipped these REST APIs. There's Outlook REST APIs, Microsoft Graph. How many of you have heard or played with those? And so I often get questions on how should I look at one, how should I pick one versus the other? So we want to take some time to introduce at least what is the API landscape. And specifically for Microsoft Graph and Outlook API, we'll go through a little more details. We're shipping a ton of new enhancements, ton of improvements to these APIs. And I will talk about what are the improvements which we have put in the last 6 months or so. Design considerations as you build these line of business apps, whether it's a service running in the background or an app you ship for a web app or a mobile app. What are the things to think through? And also a roadmap. Here's kind of where we're going, starting from things we believe will ship by the end of this year to stuff which is further out. The key takeaways here is these APIs we're going to talk about are really powerful. And if you look at it, on the right, you see mail, calendar, people, tasks. That's the start. There's even more stuff there. But just even with these, you can create really powerful, really rich applications. We have done a lot of work to make this much more secure than the prior programming models we've given you. For example, using OAuth, making sure that the app never needs to ask the user for their username and password and capture it. Instead, have the user enter it in the right place. There are REST APIs, so especially whether you're developing an app for a phone or you're writing applications on a platform of your choice, which happens to be not .NET or Java, this is like way easier to use. These are strategic for us. And this is not just for Outlook. I know this talk is about Outlook, but across all the Office services and Azure Active Directory, we're working very hard to present you one API endpoint, which is Graph, Microsoft Graph. And we are also taking a big bet on our own marquee products. And I'll show you some of that. And so for us, these APIs better work really well because the quality of our products depend on it. And hopefully all the improvements we make accrue to the line of business applications you end up developing. And they're ready for production. You can use them for production today, the production versions. We do use them in production. And so we'd love for you to also start using them. So quick overview. Why are these APIs, why are they important? Number one, these APIs give access to hundreds of millions of users across Office 365 and Outlook.com. Hybrid Exchange, we just did a talk earlier this morning. We just added support in preview for Hybrid Exchange 2016. And we're working on on-premises Exchange. Now, I get it. You're not targeting millions of users with your applications. But I'm sure you want to build on a platform which is battle tested. And this is why what we've done is, in addition to us using this platform heavily, we have opened up a huge target audience for software companies so that they want to build using these APIs. And therefore, the APIs you pick to choose for your enterprise to build applications is actually not just production ready, but really battle tested, works at scale, works well. The other advantage you have is a lot of the data, these users use Outlook several hours a day. Right? It's a key part of their job. And so an advantage here is they're very familiar with the constructs of Outlook, be it folders, message, calendar, free busy, tasks, contacts, what have you, setting your out of office message. And so if you are using APIs which reflect information the same way and your UI is similar or shows the same notions, then in a way you mitigate one of the most expensive parts of rolling out a new application or service, which is user training. If a lot of the concepts you're showing there with your own unique UI, but the basic terms are the same, and they're familiar with it because they've used Outlook, they use Outlook all the time, then that makes it much easier for them to understand what your service is doing and how to use it. It's a fairly powerful and fairly intuitive way to build these application services. Most developers today can build using HTML, they understand JSON, there's a lot of samples, there's a lot of libraries you can find for OAuth, and plus we are also developing a rich set of client libraries, and all of this is intended to do two things. One, to make sure that the developer, the ramp-up curve for somebody you have in your team or you hire to build out these applications, that the ramp-up curve is really, really smooth and the ramp-up curve is small. Two, that they enjoy, they like working in this area. And then what that does for you is, to build a quality app, you need a great set of developers. We want to make sure that you have as large a pool of developers as possible to choose from, so that then you can hire the best and the brightest, and it reflects on the quality of the apps and the user experience your users get out of it. And obviously security is a big deal. Forget the malicious apps, even the good ones, right? You want to make sure that if there's a bug in the app, that the exposure to the bug is limited. So this is one place where the REST APIs are significantly better than the older SOAP APIs we had, where here they're very granular, tightly scoped permissions, which means that if, for example, all an app has to do is read a user's calendar, then it can request a permission which says calendar.read. And so the worst that a bug in the app can do is maybe make too many requests and therefore it gets throttled, but it can't go muck with any of the data in the user's mailbox. Finally, this again goes back to the ramp-up curve. It's using industry standards, OAuth 2.0, JSON. OData 4 is something much more popular in Microsoft, but the advantage of that is that we have worked with other services such as OneDrive, SharePoint, Azure Active Directory to offer similar, like the same semantics for filtering, ordering. So in that sense, what OData 4 helps your developers with is, as they work across different entities exposed in Microsoft Graph, the semantics stay the same. Now, for Exchange Online and Exchange Online specifically, so there is a set of what I would call modern APIs, the HTML, JSON, and easy to develop, whether it's a mobile phone app or a service at scale. Graph is the API we're heavily betting on, and the goal is that it's one API with one auth to reach all applications and services. For application services to integrate with multiple Office services, with the identity platform, which is Azure Active Directory. And just this morning, we in fact expanded that to on-premises users for hybrid tenants. And it's our goal to make this the endpoint for the commercial set of users, consumer, and commercial, both cloud and also the on-premises users. What Microsoft Graph is a thin layer over specific workload endpoints. SharePoint's got one, Azure Active Directory has got one, Exchange Online has got one, which is called the Outlook REST API. There are some cases where you may end up accessing Outlook REST API directly. And I'll go through when would you end up doing that and how do you pick. We also have older APIs. A really popular one which has existed since 2007 SP1, Exchange 2007 SP1, is Exchange Web Services. It's a SOAP API, very powerful. Couple of issues. One, there is no granular access. It's a full permission. You get full permission of the mailbox. Even if the app only had to, going back to the old example, even if the app was just wanting to read the calendar, it has. And so it has full access, which means a bug could cause damage. That was one. The second is, this goes back to giving you the largest set of developers you can pick from and also make it fun for them. Over time, the feedback we've gotten is the pool of developers who want to keep working with SOAP APIs is shrinking, which makes life harder for you, and the modern API should really help there. Also, I often get questions about Exchange Active Sync because a lot of people know that the default mail clients which come packaged with the device usually are using Active Sync for the default mail client. So I get questions saying, should I just use that? The answer is no for a couple of reasons. One is, if you're doing integrations, this is not designed for you to do server-side applications, or if you have a middle tier, for the middle tier to call. Two, it requires licensing, which you don't want to get into. The other APIs, none of them need licensing. And three, from a business point of view, what has happened is, if I'm a device manufacturer and I have this default mail client, I am catering to the lowest common denominator. Users pick a variety of services to connect to. I will only implement features which all of them support. If not, it's not interesting or worth the device manufacturer's time. But all of you, you're constantly upgrading the version of Exchange you're using, either because you subscribe to the cloud service or because you're upgrading your on-prem infrastructure. You don't want to use a protocol where it's mainly implemented by people looking for the lowest common denominator. You want the cutting edge features. On our side, because of device manufacturers don't need these cutting edge features, they're not in a hurry, we generally invest in the modern APIs to put them there. So if you build using the modern APIs, you can decide when you want to use a certain feature, but at least it's available for you. So that's important. So the rest of the talk, you'll see I won't even cover ActiveSync. I think it works great for these device manufacturers, but for a lot of the line of business applications, the ones you're looking to build, we will only discuss Graph, and in some cases the Outlook REST API, and we will compare it with Exchange Web Services. So some basics about these APIs, right? Now, you need an endpoint. You need to send the request somewhere. With Exchange Web Services, you have done auto discover. Here, with Graph, it's fairly simple. Worldwide, the URL to use is graph.microsoft.com. Pretty simple, right? Now, there is one Office 365 instance in China operated by a different company. In their case, the signing, the authority which issues tokens is different, so the URL there is different. Everywhere else, it is graph.microsoft.com. If you were to call the Outlook API endpoint directly, for multi-tenant is the majority of the users generally go for multi-tenant customers, which is where you're buying licenses on a per user per month basis and it's shared infrastructure. I have the URL there, outlook.office.com/API. China has its own URL for the same reason, because that's a separate instance. And there are a lot of large customers, some of you maybe in that pool, where we are running a dedicated environment for you. In that case, the customer actually wants a vanity URL, a customer specific URL, which is tied to maybe their auth infrastructure. So there is a per customer URL. This is one place where Graph is going to be a lot easier for you to use, because what we are doing is, whether your company is in the dedicated infrastructure or in the multi-tenant, you can just go to Microsoft Graph. If you choose to call the Outlook API endpoint, then you have to figure out what this per customer, or what or you have to hardwire a different URL based on your installation, or if anyone here is developing applications for multiple customers, then it has to be configured on a per customer basis. So you know what the endpoint is. What's the next big thing? Versioning, right? Because usually there's always multiple versions. This is one place we also learned based on our web services experience. The version is explicit. You put it in the path. It's API, and when you construct the HTTP, the path, it's API endpoint/version. A production version usually is a number, 1.5, 2.0. It's some x.y version. And what we make sure is, if you use a production version, which is what you should use for your apps, then we guarantee that we make no breaking changes, which means we're not going to go change the signature of a call, or we're not going to do things which can break your app. We can make non-breaking changes. What does that mean? We may actually make let's say you go and fetch always a list of messages. New optional properties may return. We call them nullable. It just means we will return this additional richer information to you as soon as it's available. But on your side, when you create a new message, you don't have to include that. It's okay to just omit it and we'll deal with it. But for these optional properties, you should make sure that app can deal with it. The production versions, like I said, they're fully supported for you to run in production at scale. And for Graph, the latest version we have today is V1. And for Outlook, it's V2. This is just because we had ended up shipping the individual workload APIs about a year roughly ahead of Graph, and that's the only reason you see the versioning difference. But functionality wise, these two are equivalent. We also have a beta version. If you want to use the latest greatest APIs to give us feedback, this is your opportunity. You can call APIs in beta, and this is an opportunity for you to use them, give us feedback, and help shape the direction of the APIs before we move them or promote them to the production version. In beta, based on the feedback we get from you all, we may make breaking changes. That's why you don't want to use it in production. But when you want to play with it, we've got a whole framework around when we make the breaking change. We don't do it all the time. Sometimes we have to. We will publish, we'll give you some advance notice, but it's not going to be enough for you to put it on a production version. So I've talked about the endpoint, I've talked about version. Now you need to get to the mailbox, the users, or maybe a group mailbox. So how do you do that? So you put API/version, users, and you can put their email address, or you can put their the ID issued by Azure Active Directory. Now, it's very convenient for applications which are always having a user login, and it's only going against that user's information. You don't have to keep finding what their email address is and append it after users. Instead, you can use a shortcut, /me. What /me is telling Graph or the Outlook endpoint is, whichever user is mentioned in the token, because the token has user context, that's the user's mailbox I want to go to. Very convenient. If you want to address a Office 365 group, a modern group, then it's very similar. It's /groups/ID, where ID is the Azure Active Directory group ID. One other tip here, if you're calling the Outlook REST APIs directly, there's a header you should use called X-Anchor Mailbox, and you put the email address of the mailbox you're accessing. If the signed in user is the same as the mailbox they're accessing, they're just going to their own mailbox, the app is taking them there, then it's the signed in user's mailbox. But think of a delegate scenario where somebody got permissions to someone else's mailbox, or is, there's a shared mailbox for a help desk scenario and the employee is accessing that. In that case, you would put the help desk mailbox address there. And the reason to do this is it helps, when we receive a request on the service to route it to the actual place where it's processed, we have to do a bunch of directory lookups. When you send this, some of the lookups automatically get eliminated because we know we have some stuff cached and we can use the cache and route you faster. And so the benefit for you is going to be decreased latency in some cases. Okay, so now you know how to get to the resource. How do you authenticate, right? How does auth work? Graph, V1, actually Graph and Outlook API endpoints require OAuth. This is great. The reason being, when you write an app for yourself, or you find an app which is doing some important function in your company, the app doesn't need to ask the user for the username and password. Instead, what the app is going to do is go to Azure Active Directory first, and in the process of getting a token, first authentication happens. Azure Active Directory will figure out what policies you got. For example, in the case of Microsoft IT, it doesn't want Azure Active Directory to sign in the user. It wants to redirect the user to an on-premises ADFS server. So that's the page you see. That's where the user enters their creds. 2, it has some policies. In my case, I have to sign in with a two-factor auth using my smart card. That gets enforced. Now, the developer didn't do anything to make that happen. They just are following the flow. Once the user signed in and the user's identity is verified, then there's a second step where the app needs to be issued a token which has the requisite permission so the app can do its job. And we support multiple flows. Number one, also as part, we support OpenID Connect, so there's single sign-on and the app can display basic information with the user. And then there's several OAuth flows supported. The first one, the second line there, the code flow, that is for a case where a user logs in at some point, confirms their identity, grants consent for some permission, and then that consent is recorded, and the app gets an access token and a refresh token, and it can use those to keep coming back and making calls. The client credential flow is very useful if you're running a background process. So, often we have seen this where they have like a line of business app or a CRM system, they have Exchange, and there's a background job which is syncing calendar. Some companies I've got a recruiting system where a recruiting database where I know where people are going for interviews, trips, and they've got the users' calendars in Exchange. If you have a background job which runs once a day and goes and keeps these in sync, then that client credential flow is useful for you. An administrator in this case would consent because it can access multiple mailboxes in the org. But at that point, it never needs the user to provide any context. The administrator is granted access to it. And there are other scenarios. For example, some companies are heavily investing in purely web-based apps, single-page apps using, let's say, framework like AngularJS. In that case, there are certain flows they need where there is no server in between, and whatever they get an access token, it's used in the app running in the browser, and then it can just go fetch again new tokens when the original token expires, and so on. The granular consent is very important too. I talked about this, right? Here's an example where, in this case, we purposely asked for consent to a lot of permissions, so you kind of get a flavor of what types exist. But they go from as large as full access to your calendars to a very granular permission, which is send message. Because our customers have, you have indicated that send is a very sensitive permission, so I don't want to club it with read and write mail. So it's a separate thing. And so an app has to explicitly tell the user or the admin that, hey, I need this permission. So with that, I'm going to show, before we go into any more detail, you kind of got a flavor. Let me show you one application we have here which uses these APIs, so you get a feel for it. So this is my iPhone, and I just opened an app called Outlook on iOS. This has our Outlook brand, and this is completely powered by REST APIs. And it's connected to a demo user who we had set up. Her name is Megan. And what you see here in the app is you're seeing her inbox. If you look at the top, you see something called focused and other. That is information being returned back from the REST API for each message. And this is part of the intelligence piece. There is background computation going on in our service to figure out, based on how you respond to mails you have received in the past from these people or with these topics, we have classified, we're taking a guess at which ones you really want to pay attention to and which ones are more routine. So some like an automated notification. And what the app is doing here is it's constructing two different views by filtering on that property. At the core, what this is using is two APIs which are critical to the user experience. One, notifications. There's a middle tier which gets notified using what's called a webhook from the server that the user has new mail. The device is notified, it goes and syncs the mail. And a key metric we have had to measure and improve so that the users are satisfied with this is, if I have a phone and I have sync turned off in the background and I get notified I got a new mail, if I swipe it, how quickly can I see the list view so I can click on the message? It turns out that's a key metric. And it ended up driving a ton of improvements, not just in the API layer, but how the requests are routed, how many directory lookups we do to figure out who the user is and who the recipients are, how this information is stored in the store. The beauty is, because of this app, all of these improvements accrue to you. So that's basic, right? Just message sync APIs. You also have calendar. So you can see here I have different calendar appointments. Let's say I pull this up. You can see I can take actions here. That's the RSVP. Not only that, we return the online meeting URL from Skype as a first-class property. And as a result, you can see it has a join link. And if I click on this, it'll pull up Skype and invoke Skype. So this is the convenience. This is the fun part, right? This is the delighter part, because now you made it very easy on the phone to go join a meeting. And that's because the API makes it possible by giving you a first-class property. Also, even in the inbox view itself, it very clearly is able to indicate which one is just a message, versus what we call an event message, either a response from someone or an invitation from somebody, and you don't even have to go to the calendar. Here's the convenience. It gets enough information from us to say you can RSVP from here. Not only that, we also provide additional properties. We have computed to tell it, this is an outdated invite, there's a new one already available, or here's the changes from the old one. And all of these are very similar to the constructs in desktop Outlook, which people are very used to. And so the nice thing is they quickly pick this up. One other thing, you can also do things like, if you look at the top, it says automatic replies turn off. This is because the APIs also expose the ability to set your out of office message, or at least disable it, enable it, enter the text, and so on. Once again, because people are used to using it from Outlook, they expect it from Outlook on iOS. This carries our Outlook brand, and therefore the quality of the APIs are very important to us, and we'll continue to invest heavily. And all of these, like I said, all of these APIs we make public over time, and so the benefits of this will accrue to you as you build applications. So with that, I'm going to switch back to the deck. Let's dig a little more into the details. So what exactly is Graph? I'm going to keep this brief because I think a lot of you have been there, but really it's a single endpoint for accessing data, and it spans not just Outlook entities, but many files, users, groups, and then traversing the data, which means I can say, hey, go to OneDrive, look at this item, who's the last modified person, I can go look up the user, I can say what set of meetings do they have, whatever I want to do to navigate this graph. Also, focus versus others is an example I gave before, but there's a ton of insights we're computing on our side. You can access that, such as what is the set of trending documents, and what are the people I'm working with reading or looking at. And finally, it's the one endpoint for work, personal, and school. And so it has a large target audience, and once again, this is to invite and motivate developers to send a ton of requests. We use it on our production apps, and between them, we can make sure that this is completely production ready and works great at scale. This is the URL, and you can see, as I said before, from going from a siloed world where think about this is how it was before, where a developer who has to actually go join data across these multiple workloads has to learn Exchange Authn APIs, SharePoint Authn APIs, directory, Skype, what have you. And instead, what we have done is we've made it simple, right? So the amount of time it takes for them to ramp up and the number of people you can find to go be able to easily work and make a significant contribution is much larger. The benefits for the developers you have in your teams who are doing these applications, it's one auth, it's one API, again, it's easy to develop, and this is important too. Not only is it easy to develop because it's familiar technology, web technologies, we have a dedicated team working on a large set of client libraries. Some of them are in production, some are in preview, some are in the works. And the reason we could do it is, even though we are a very large company, it doesn't scale for Exchange team to invest in libraries and SharePoint invest in libraries and every team to invest in libraries. Instead, we've pooled our resources. There's a dedicated team, and that team is able to generate a large number of runtimes. So if you picked a certain technology for any reason or a platform in your company, then hopefully, most likely, we will have an SDK which suits your needs. And what that does is, that allows the developers to be even more productive because they are using programming patterns or practices which are intuitive to that platform. The entities which are supported, exactly what data can you get? Mail, calendar, and mail is folders, messages, calendar has calendar groups, events, reminders, contacts, groups. Groups, I've only shown the Outlook specific stuff, but groups especially you have to go through Graph because it also, then you can get the group files, you can get the group tasks, you get a ton of other information. Profile, whatever profile you have in the AAD. Profile picture, this is another interesting case. Some people just have the default picture in AD. Others have stored a HD picture, which we end up storing in the user's mailbox because of the size of the object. It's completely counterintuitive for a developer to expect the profile picture to be accessed at outlook.office.com. They're going to go to AAD. If you go through Graph, you don't care where it was stored. That's an implementation choice on our side. and we can now abstract it from you so you don't have to worry about it. Mailbox settings, another very popular API. Being able to set the signed in users out of office message or get it, language, time zone. That would be very useful. The language and time zone are especially important if when you're onboarding a new employee in your company, you want to set some of these up, you can do it systemically using this. And extensibility, huge. Every one of you has custom unique needs. Sometimes you have to reference IDs for objects maintained in your own internal systems. You have to associate it with a mail item, a calendar item. And in the past, the way you've done it is using extended properties. It's a construct available all the way from MAPI. And it works great if you know what you're doing. But it's a slightly complicated concept. And we've introduced something even simpler called extensions. Extensions has two advantages. One is just a JSON blob, and you just add it to whichever item you want. Two, because it's a JSON blob, unlike extended properties where you need to find one place to store each property and just try to cobble a namespace together, in this case you can store a blob where you got all the related stuff in one place. And in terms of capabilities across all of these, we support CRUD, we support webhooks, and this is on the graph we want, so all of this is production ready. In addition to these, on beta we have a bunch of stuff. We have just introduced social gestures are very popular in social networks, and now we're bringing them to Outlook. So the ability to @mention is something we recently added in Outlook, and as soon as you @mention, the person is added to the to list. Before I would highlight them, then remember to add them. If not, you see the reply all actually adding Joe. Well, you don't have to do that. Reference attachment is an attachment in the cloud, which appears as an attachment, but it's actually in the cloud and the permissions are there. Find meeting times. As opposed to overwhelming a user with that FreeBusy grid you see where we found out when you got 15, 16 people, you're trying to find a time slot, people just pick what works for them. Find meeting times will take the list of people, look at the working hours, look at their FreeBusy info, and come back with a set of candidate times, which then you can pick from. So way better. Sometimes the gaps we fill like forwarding an event. People. You know, today you either have mailbox contacts or you got people in the directory, and sometimes when you're searching, you got to go both places. People joins that view, but it limits the set to the set of people you most often communicate with. And when you go into Outlook and you're trying to type and it puts the name there, Outlook on iOS does it as well. It's actually calling the people API and saying, give me the set of people starting with J or JO or JOE, and that API is available as well. And that's a really popular API. Profile, not just a single picture, but you can get pictures of many different sizes. Mail tips. This is another huge saver. And going back to the intelligence piece, right? In Outlook, when you're typing an email, composing an email, it'll tell you you're sending it to Deepak, but Deepak is out of the office. You can look at the out of office message and adjust what you're doing. Or it'll tell you, hey, do you realize that one of the people you have and the two in the CC is outside your organization? Because maybe you just fat fingered something by mistake, you picked them. Well, that'd be huge to know. Or that, hey, you're sending it to a large DL. These types of mail tips, we've just pushed out the APIs to do that. And this will let your apps be much more aware and guide the user to not make mistakes. And capabilities wise, Graph has already gotten sync in preview, and we want to move that to production over time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deepak, who's going to show some of these on a web app he's built.
Okay, thank you, Venkat. So I have a lot of demos to present over here, but before I present demo, I wanted to tell what did we do before even getting to this point. So the first thing what I did was I got an Office 365 demo tenant with multiple users in it. All of those users were cloud users, and their mailbox was hosted in cloud. Second thing which I did was so out of all multiple users, I'm going to use 3 users from my tenant to show all my demo. The first one and the most important one is Megan. I'm going to show her mailbox and everything. The other 2 who's going to be helping in the demo is going to be Ben, Mr. Ben, and I think Lydia. Those 3 people I'll be using them to show my demo. So okay, let's see. I've logged into Megan's OA, and that is Outlook on web. And then, as you can see, this is her mailbox. This is her inbox. She gets some messages. If you want to see event calendar, all the cool stuff you can see over here. It's a pretty fancy app, and I wanted to build something similar. That is, using the REST API, my app is able to pull all this similar information, that is message, calendar, contact for Megan. Okay.
Without any UX help.
Without any UX help. Yeah. So I quickly built an app, and I pulled out a template from one of the documentation places for our REST APIs, and hooked it up and wanted it to work. So let's see, let's try to get messages for Megan. Quick thing to notice, I'm going to try to log into Megan's account, but the login place is not going to be my app. My app is not taking the credentials of the user. Login.microsoft.com, that is AAD, is taking the credentials of the user. So the credentials are safe, and all my app is going to be getting is the OAuth token, okay, with all the granular permissions. So let's log in using Megan. Cool. First, before I go any further, let me give a little layout of the app. The first box which you see on the left-hand corner, that has the OAuth token which I just received from AAD. Second box shows the HTTP response which I have got, which is 200 OK, so cool. We have successfully run our messages query. The third box is actual response from Graph. One thing to notice over here is I am accessing graph.microsoft.com. My app is using a lot of production features as well as beta features. So I was just to be, for my entire app, I just used the beta endpoint. I didn't differentiate between them. And the last is I'm showing, in the last box, I'm showing the response headers which I have received from Graph. Okay, so now I'm in this view, I'm accessing the messages of Megan by using me/messages. As I can see, she has a lot of messages in her inbox. However, since, as Venkat mentioned, social media is becoming famous, and because of that, we are incorporating a lot of social patterns in our APIs. So what we have done, and a lot of times what we do while creating messages is we write @John or @Gina in our message body. So now what we have done is we have exposed those mentioned folks through as a first party, as a first class properties in the message, so that the developers can use them, or they can use them to build unique scenario. For example, over here, what I've done is now I have a list of all the messages in my mailbox, but I want to filter and get only the messages where Megan has been mentioned or where I have been mentioned. So I'm just going to click that, and as you can see, now my messages have been filtered to messages where only I am mentioned. So this is a powerful scenario where people can build different scenarios around it, where if someone has been mentioned or someone has not been mentioned on these kind of stuff.
Going back to building information, mining more intelligence out of it, you could have an admin consented app which is running the background analyzing. When people get mentioned, the API actually gives you details like who mentioned this person. So you can start actually figuring out the networks in your own teams, right? Now, you can do it for in present analytics for a single user, saying how often do different people mention and loop me into threads, or you could even do it across a company where you start looking at the data and constructing, aggregate numbers on, okay, how do these networks look like? And this is and to make that possible, when we provide some basic insights, but in the end, you're going to have a lot more insights which you may want to generate out of the data.
Yeah, social gestures has right now been put in Graph beta endpoint, and you can leverage it or use it for playing with your app. Okay, the next scenario which I want to mention is hey, whenever you are sending an email, it will be very cool that before even sending the mail, I see that hey, what is that guy's offline status, whether he's available or not, or is he asking me to add someone else in the email. So I've tried to do that. Let's try to send an email to Ben. Mr. Ben W is already present in the too. Okay. So now, before even I send an email, I want to see that, hey, is he available or is he asking me to do something else? So I'm going to call the mail tips API, which Venkat mentioned, and see, as you can see, the automatic replies of Ben is asking me to add Christy. So all I need to do right now is add Christy in the email as well. let's check again if Christy is also sending any OOF message. It looks like no, she's not. It's only Ben is sending the OOF message. So let's say, hi from Ignite. Cool. The send mail API sends this message to the recipients. One thing to notice over here is since in my message view I'm doing me/messages, it's pulling messages from my entire mailbox, irrespective of the folder. Therefore, you can see, hey, the message which I had sent, which is there in my sent folder, it's available over here. Now let's go to Ben's mailbox to see if Ben has received this message. Where is? Let's go to.
You want to go up?
Where is Mr. Ben's messages? For some reason it has not yet been delivered.
The demo gods, don't worry about it. Keep
Okay.
going. We'll come back here.
Let's come back to that and check later if the message was delivered. Okay, the next thing which I want to showcase over here is, as Venkat was showing in the mobile, that Outlook Mobile is able to find out the meeting URL or the Skype URL for the user and use that to connect to Skype. So what we have done is we have exposed online meeting URL as one of the first class property on the event object, so that the apps can now read the meeting URL and give the choice for the user to connect to the Skype URL directly. So now meeting URL has been shown over here. This feature has been this feature is available on the GA endpoint of Graph. Cool. Now one of the most popular feature or the scenario which we have, which has been requested to us is like, hey, I have the ability to forward a message. I now want to forward events as well. So we have added that forward API, where you just add the user. For example, I'm going to add Ben again. And forward that event to Ben. The moment I forward this event, two things happen. One, Ben gets the invite, the meeting invite which I had forwarded to him. And the second thing is the person who had sent me the invite also gets a notification saying that, hey, your meeting was forwarded to person X. Let's see if those guys got the notification. So this is Lydia's email, this is Lydia's inbox, who had actually sent me that email. And I can see I have a meeting forward notification, and that was sent. So Megan Brown forwarded your message to Ben. And let's see if Ben actually received the meeting invitation. Yep. There you go. Ben received the meeting invitation as well, forward meeting invitation with the comment which I had added.
Once again, one of the things we've done here is the business logic which is exercised when you forward is exactly what happens when you do it from Outlook. And that way users understand that, okay, if I hit forward and because I need someone else to join the meeting, the organizer is going to be informed and they're not going to be surprised, and that person will get the invite. So by keeping the behavior identical by exercising the same code, what we're doing is making sure that the users are you're not getting a lot of questions about why does this app do something different, right? We want to keep it same because then training is easy, user training is easy.
Cool.
Does it work for tasks?
Yes, you will see that. Stay tuned.
Okay. Next thing which I wanted to show was like not only the ability, so as we were mentioning, we have now support for automatic replies or mailbox settings, and which has been GA'd. So as you can see over here, I'm now able to fetch my own mailboxes, automatic replies, what am I sending, I am able to get or set that. Similarly, time zone and language of my mailbox, I'm able to retrieve, set it as well. So, and these three properties or these three entities have been GA'd as well, or it's been moved from the Graph beta endpoint to the Graph V1 endpoint. So those are the demos I have right now. So back to you, Venkat.
Thanks, Deepak. So we talked a lot about Microsoft Graph, you saw some demos. Okay, what about the Outlook REST endpoint? Really, when you're making requests to Graph for Outlook specific entities, it's calling the Outlook endpoint. So it's just sitting underneath. And there are a few additional capabilities there. Tasks, I think you had asked about tasks, that's available right now. Groups, task groups, folders. We have already pushed sync and folder hierarchy sync. So not just sync messages or events or tasks, but the ability to sync the hierarchy of folders, because the message sync happens on a per folder basis. That's in production. That's something Outlook on iOS uses. And in beta, there's a few more capabilities. There's something called streaming notifications. So far, our notification story has been that when you subscribe for, hey, tell me anytime this user gets a new mail, you have to tell us, and when they get a new mail, go post a notification to this URL, which is a endpoint you host. But what if you're an app like Mac Outlook, something which is just purely on the client, doesn't have a URL it can provide? Streaming notifications works really well for that, because then the app initiates a connection, hanging connection, receives notifications on it, and has to reestablish once, let's say an hour or every 45 minutes. So that's something we added in preview. And also batching. Today batching is available in preview, where you as a signed user, the app can send multiple requests for efficiency reason. Now, so there are two endpoints. How are you supposed to pick which one? So like I said, Graph is just proxying, and so the same business logic is exercised in both cases for APIs which are present in both places. How come Outlook has more endpoints? Well, our focus is on getting Graph to be as full-featured as possible, but usually when new APIs are deployed, we first roll them out worldwide on the Exchange Online service, and then within 1 to 2 months, then we're able to go add it to Microsoft Graph. For most of you, usually the 1 to 2 month is not that material, and most of them, they prefer to wait for Graph. But there are other times when it can take longer. Let's take batching. Batching Outlook requests, we got a clear story. But what if you're calling by Graph and you want to batch requests for a user across things stored in SharePoint and Exchange and directory? Well, that's a kind of a hard problem to solve. So we're working through everything to make sure that whatever we end up with is not confusing for the developer, also doesn't cause any scale issues. So sometimes it can take longer because we have to go figure this out. And also, sometimes what happens is tasks. Why is it available in Outlook but not in Graph? Because Graph already has planner tasks which are used for groups. So before we put Outlook tasks there, we got to kind of rationalize the two things. We already had to do that across OneDrive and Exchange, where both have folders, but they're completely different kinds of folders. And so we looked through it and we decided to rename them as mail folders, roll out the changes, and they're available now. But we will have to do something similar for tasks as well. We are working very hard, some of the people who work with us are in the room here, to drive that gap down to 0. But today these gaps exist, and in some cases like batching or sync, sync is here, batching or tasks, if you need to, you can take it. At least we made sure that the Outlook endpoint is available for you to take advantage of it and unblock yourself while we figure out how to get it onto the Graph. So our guidance is very simple. Start with Graph, use it, unless you're blocked by an API gap, because one, it kind of future-proofs your app. Over time, as your scenarios change and you really want to start fetching information from somewhere, or we on our side have some implementation detail, like the fact that the user's directory profile picture is stored in a mailbox, you're kind of hidden, you're completely hidden from it. Also, if you are a hybrid customer and you have on-premises Exchange 2016, we announce support in preview. That is only available in Graph, because it's only Graph which has the intelligence to take the request, figure out the user, and either send it to Exchange Online, which is their Outlook endpoint, or to the on-premises server. So if you got hybrid users, you got to go with what Graph has. I'm not going to go through all these sample requests, but this is just kind of, it'll be in the deck. It's just to give you some sense of what are the different types of things available, from getting information, getting a person's picture, syncing, to actually finding times or batching multiple APIs. I'm going to hand it back to Deepak to do a quick demo of both the tasks and Outlook OAuth Sandbox.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Venkat. Switching back. So Venkat mentioned about two endpoints, that is Graph endpoint and the Outlook endpoint. How do we play with these endpoints? How do we play with these different endpoints? We need some tool. So what we have come up with is we have two different apps or a portal available online, which you can use to play with the different endpoints. So I'm going to show both, and I'm going to show both for two different features as well. So let's start with Graph. So if you want to play with the Graph APIs, go to graph.microsoft.io. There you have try the API portal. You can go there, you can sign in. Since I have already signed in as Megan, it will ask me to sign in again. And now you have the ability to play with the Graph APIs. What I'm going to try to show over here is one of the features which we call extensions, and which is what we are again putting into production endpoint right now. It's super powerful that hey, on each of the message or item, I want to add a custom property, because each organization has their own requirements. Each LOB has their LOB apps have their own requirements. So now I'm going to add a custom property on the message of Megan. Let me try to do that.
and the scenario we have here is, let's assume that you have your internal system through which purchase orders are issued, or all communication needs to be tracked related to purchasing. And one of the things which would be really convenient is any messages sent out, which are finally sent out through APIs through the mailbox, it'd be convenient to stamp those messages with a custom property, which says, hey, here's a purchase order details, ID, and maybe the company name. And then you can go back and say, okay, in Megan's case, give me every message she has sent out which are related to a purchase order, and you have a way to do that. And so that means that you can start querying, you can generate some information, insights, or maybe it's for audit reasons, whatever it be, right? And the way you join these systems is by using these extensions.
Yeah. For example, if Megan is using one of the purchase order apps, the app can actually, before sending the mail, where as of now I'm creating a draft mail in Megan's mailbox, the app before sending the mail can add this extension or add this custom property on the message. Over here, since we are sending a purchase order, for some reason I feel Coca-Cola is pretty popular in Atlanta. So they're trying to add a purchase order for Coca-Cola. Let's see what happens. Doing this has created a message on draft message on Megan's mailbox, and which has the extension property. Now what I want to do is I want to retrieve all the message which has this custom property. So in order to do that, I can easily filter on these extensions and get only the messages which have the custom property. So
and one thing you want to pay attention to is this extension name, and that has this reverse DNS setup. This is the way you kind of call out, you assign a name to your custom property. So you may have a com.contoso.purchase order, com.contoso.something else, referral, whatever it be, but that's how you're going to go come back and locate it.
Cool. So now let's see what I'm trying to do over here is I'm trying to filter on the extension where I'm specifying that, hey, the extension name is going to be the name which I provided, that is com.contoso.purchase order, and then I'm going to show, expand the filter and show as well, or expand the extension and show as well. So let's filter. So now I've got back only the messages that have the extension com.contoso.purchase order. There you go. We have one.
That extension be displayed in the mailbox?
No.
Nope.
It's hidden from the mailbox. It's there, stored in the store, but for example, if a user goes and looks at it in Outlook, they would not see this.
Yeah, but your app, if they want to show it, it can show it. Cool. Now,
it's implemented as a custom Mariby property, but it's an easier construct because in this case, if you use extended properties, you have to have one for vendor, one for order ID. Here you can create a blob, maybe you have more properties, and you just store it as one blob and retrieve it. So in that sense, it's much more efficient.
Yeah. All right. So now you have seen that you can use this tool, first of all, to play with the Graph APIs and how extensions work. Now I'm going to show how do you play with the Outlook APIs, Outlook endpoint APIs. For that, we have another tool which we call it as OAuth Sandbox, and this targets our Outlook endpoint. In order to, let's again try to use Megan's mailbox, and what I want to display using this tool is tasks which was requested. Let's log into this first using Megan. Now I've logged into this. What we have over here is we have got authorization. In order to make any successful request, I need to get tokens. So now I've got few tokens as well. For this, this tool provides a nifty way to already execute the pre-canned queries. We have a list of pre-canned queries which you can play with, or you can write your own queries as well. It helps you play with different APIs, but for now, or different endpoints or different versions. But for now, I think I'm going to stick with our latest version, production version. So all I want to show over here is like, hey, similar to this, Outlook.office. Now what you can do is, if you want to get tasks of the this person, all you need to do is outlook.office.com/API v2.0 me/tasks. And the moment you do that, you can see all the tasks which Megan has in her mailbox. As of now, she has 3. Check the side, take dog for a walk, everything. Now, by default, we return a lot of properties in the response. For your apps, if you do not require all the properties, we recommend you to use the $select filter, which is going to be, for example, where I just want the subject and the due date of the task. So I'm going to do, after task, I'm going to add this query parameter $select. $select is equal to subject and due date time, which is the name of the property. And now if I execute this, for each of the entity, I'm just going to get those 2 properties. So this makes your query much faster. Your latency is going to be pretty less in this. So now, please use this OAuth Sandbox to play with the Outlook endpoint. And I think I'm going to switch back to Venkat for this.
Thank you, Deepak. So why don't we quickly, I think we covered a lot of this information. Hybrid, we had a talk this morning. The main thing I wanted to show you was, in this case, there's a cloud and on-premise user of the same tenant. And the cloud users got their mailbox in the left and the cloud, the on-premises one and the on-premises one. And you can see in this app, there's a complicated flow, but all of that's orchestrated by Graph. And all the app is seeing running in that her PC is just 1 and 6. I called MS Graph, I got Microsoft Graph, and I got back a response. Similarly, with the help of 2 new services we introduced in the on-premises Exchange 2016 CU3, although there's more going on, checking AD, leveraging the auto discover endpoint, which is a JSON one, the logic for the app is the same, at least in terms of the flow. Capabilities could be different, but it just sent a request and got back a response. This is in preview, and for on-premises, mail, calendar, contacts, profile, mailbox, data extensibility, where extended properties, extensions will come out soon, and basic CRUD are all supported, and we're going to keep adding, and we're looking for feedback to take it to GA, but this is a huge capability we've added just right now. Also, some of the APIs Deepak showed in Graph, there was a mailbox settings API to set your time out of the office, automatic reply, or time zone, extensions, extended properties, those are in production now. And in the Outlook case, task APIs, and we have promoted the sync APIs to 2.0. Both of these we're actively working to get them onto Microsoft Graph as well. New APIs added in beta, a whole bunch of them. This is again, I'm only covering the Outlook specific stuff. Mail tips, @mentions. There's a new event message request type. So we found from our experience with moving the Outlook on iOS to REST that it's not enough to just tell it that, hey, this is a kind of a it's a calendar-related message, it's either a response from somebody or an invitation, they needed to know the invitation specifically, because often you get an invitation, then you get an updated one, the location got changed, and they have UI around figuring out, okay, what do I show them, what has changed, show it crossed out. So to help with all of that, there's a new class called event message request, forwarding an event, and I talked about streaming notifications. Streaming notifications are also very useful. We want to bring them, they're not yet available. Notifications are not yet available for hybrid, we're working to bring them. But streaming notifications is very useful because a lot of on-premises customers don't want to open up their Exchange server to initiate requests outside the firewall, but they're okay with the client issuing a request and waiting for responses. So we certainly want to support that. Some design considerations. One question, extensions versus extended properties, which one should I use, right? We recommend generally using extensions because of the grouping you get, number one. But there are some things which extended properties can do which extensions can't yet do it. Complex properties and filtering using complex properties is still work in progress. Also, today extensions are supported on message or contact or event. They're not yet supported on the container, which is like a mail folder, contact folder, calendar. If you need to stamp a custom property on those, you still need to use extended properties. Also, if you have an existing line of business app, you wrote it in AWS, you're looking to move to REST, then extended properties is a great way to do it because it minimizes the cost of porting, because you probably are already using extended property APIs and it's just about translating them to this corresponding REST queries. Permissions for both work the same way. The permissions the app needs to be granted to access, an extended property is the permission it needs to grant to access the parent object, which is in this case could be a message or an event. Filter versus search. We got both these operators, and that's one question I get. What is the difference? When you're doing filter, you're just going straight to our store, underlying Exchange store, and it's got tables, and you're basically telling it, I'm giving you a restriction, give me back a view back. And there's some optimization there they do where, especially if it's a properties they index, then it's going to be very fast. Sometimes the cost is very high, so then we reject the call. If you're looking to generate a view, generally filter is going to work well for you. If you're looking to do full text search, then call $search, because then what we're doing is we're not going against the store, we're going against indexes generated by FAST in Exchange, which is computed this index, and then it does a full text search and returns everything in there. For batching, key thing to remember, the batch endpoint we have today, number one, you can only request batch, you can batch API to single mailbox. Why is that? Really what Exchange is it's an at-scale user partitioned store with a bunch of logic on top. And we can batch transactions and route them to a single mailbox, but if we try doing fan out, because of our high availability architecture, these different mailboxes you're fanning out could be very far away, and your app could be waiting a long time, so we don't want to do that. A second limitation of the existing batching API, which we're addressing right now, is the API, it's API/$batch, so we don't know which user you want. So it has to run with a token with user context in there, because then we'll look at the token and say, oh, this is the user all these operations are intended for. But that's something we are already addressing. For performance, if you're calling the Outlook endpoint, call outlook.office.com, not office365.com. It's a subtle difference. But where office.com lands, there's additional network optimization being done to send them through hot network paths. And what that does is you're much more likely to hit caches along the way, and the request latency is going to be lower. And the second is the Xanchor mailbox. I'm just repeating that included. It does no harm. Again, even if you're calling through MS Graph, today Microsoft Graph, it doesn't do anything, but it doesn't do any harm. But over time, we do want to leverage that. Very important, use select like Deepak showed, which only requests the properties you need. Not all properties are made equal. If you ask for body every time, it's going to take a lot more time to process the request. Top lets you limit the page size. Only give me 10 at a time. Filter is to narrow down the filter to the set you actually want. It's more important both from a bytes over wire, driving it down in the case of especially a phone app running on mobile. And also you don't want to wait for unnecessary processing because the requests are going to take more time. Smart reply and forward is something we added. It's available. This is an ability to minimize in one round trip. If you do reply all, you add somebody and then you send it off and it goes out. Before we did the work on Outlook on iOS, it used to be 3 different requests, and they came back and said, this is not going to work, and so we made those changes, and they're available. Also, notifications. We have a great notification story for Graph, webhooks. If you've got a place where you can host an endpoint to listen, use that rather than polling. For throttling, when we throttle, we return a status code of 429, especially from Outlook. Just respect the retry after time and use backoff, the standard exponential backoff when you see service unavailable error. And please add instrumentation to your app to capture, first of all, send us a client request ID and user agent. Make sure that if there's a failure, you have a log where you're storing everything we send back in the response. If you're calling Graph, there's this request ID we send you. If you give that to us, we can quickly track down where it is. Outlook API, I think, sends you a larger set of headers, which also tell us which servers the request was processed in. So please log that. That'll help with quickly going down. EWS versus REST. What this table shows, the columns are these two, REST and EWS, and the rows are different criteria. Exchange Web Services is very rich. REST APIs are getting there. They're not there, but we're investing heavily. They do give you granular permissions. They give you a nice way of doing app-only access for daemon apps. With EWS, you do have app impersonation, but there is a credential still shared with the app. Reach-wise, great reach for Office 365 and Outlook.com. On-premises, of course, APIs are supported in REST, but it's for the latest, greatest. Exchange goes back much earlier. And functionality-wise, we're almost there. People API, we need to GA, mail, calendar, contacts, and tasks are there. But in terms of the convenience of joining data between that, Exchange data or Outlook data and other services, being mobile-friendly, batching, or notifications is a much, much better story at REST and getting better. So our recommendation is generally go with REST. That's our strategic direction. And I think we'll make a lot more investments there. In terms of what's next, most requested feature, I get questions about in Stack Overflow all the time. Why is it taking so long? I need this right away. I'm not going to go through the details here, but basically we are coming up with ways to address this. And not only to be able to address a mailbox, and if you have access to it, you get the data back, so it's other than yours, because you have permissions. Or also, how do I know who gave me access to calendars? Is there a list I can query? Well, the calendar team has built that infrastructure, and we're working to expose it. So it's very, very close. And these, I believe, we should be able to get, hopefully by end of the year. There's also a bunch of APIs which are on deck to be promoted to production. Find Meetings API, forwarding, mail tips, People. People API today is read-only. That's what we'll GA. There's additional capabilities we'll add over time. One which is missing today is, can I search all of the directory and all of the contacts by calling people? Not today. Today it keeps an index of a couple of thousand people, and that's the index it's searching. So if you don't communicate with somebody who's in your company directory and you're trying to search them, it's not going to find the results. So you have to go search AAD, and we want to fix that. Our new batching API, I mentioned a limitation that today you can only batch requests. It's expecting to find the user details of the token. We are adding a new API endpoint where the user detail is in the app. So therefore, if you have a daemon app and you need to run efficiently, it can start batching calls now and streaming notifications. A bunch of feature requests we've received, MIME improvements, calendar improvements related to groups. Also for online, we only return a URL. People want phone numbers and other properties, complex type support. Also for REST API, today, if you ask to sync, you get an incremental update. You get only the messages which have changed. But for that message, you get everything. And it's still wasteful use of bandwidth. And we are doing work to return partial updates. So we will only send you the properties which changed. We want to exit preview of hybrid. Again, if you look at if you go watch the talk this morning, you'll get a lot more details. But some pieces which we have to ship, hybrid config wizard, ability to query per user and find out what capabilities actually exist for them, and some API improvements to make it easier. And we expect a lot of feedback. Hybrid's a complicated environment, and there's a lot of variety in the way people deploy on-premises. So we're looking to learn in this case. A whole bunch of related sessions, some of them in the past, but I just put a table. We put a table, so if you want, you can go watch these recordings afterwards. A lot of work, as you can see, happening with Graph. This one is the hybrid. And finally, just to wrap up, please, this is a great set of APIs. We're working heavily for you to go build out your line of business apps and to make your users more productive, to make their lives much better. They're powerful, they're secure, they're very easy to use, and we're continuously taking feedback to make them easier. They're the direction we are investing heavily in, and we're betting our own apps on it, and they're ready for production. And here's a set of resources. For Graph, if you have how-to questions you're blocked, just go to Stack Overflow. API, we watch GitHub, go submit a ticket, and go submit a user voice. Submit a user voice for anything else, and it gets voted, so we'll know which one is bubbling up to the top. And similarly for Outlook REST API, you can either post on Stack Overflow or use the same user voice forum. So some standard boilerplate slides. Please take a look at this. Microsoft Fast Track, the tech community, join the tech community, and please give us feedback. I really, really appreciate you patiently waiting all this while, but we'd like to take questions. Thank you.
So,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
what is available in GA now in terms of Graph? Is anything available?
Oh, there's a ton of APIs available in GA. So anything we put on the slide is V1 is production ready. You should be able to use it. And so messages, calendar, contacts, a whole bunch. I mean, I even forget the set. It's a large set.
Yeah.
The second question, there's some talks on Office add-in,
Yep.
and Outlook is part of the deal.
Yep.
Do they use Graph or do
So, no, I think that's a great question. We are still, we've been focused on adding the functionality to the APIs. The question was, what is the interop between Outlook add-ins and Graph? Today, it's not there. I've been focused on building out the functionality, but that's something we're working on. So that today, from an Outlook add-in JavaScript code, you can actually call, you can ask its platform for what is the EWS URL and make EWS calls. We want to replace that with instead, or we want to add the ability to call Graph with REST API calls. So that's very much in the works and something we certainly want to do, but that's a great question. You had a question too?
I got several questions. One, when you're setting custom properties, does it set the printable Boolean to true or false when you're setting custom properties?
So the question is, when we set the custom properties, does it set the, sorry, what Boolean?
Whenever you set mapping properties, there's a hidden printable property, and it's true or false. So the Outlook object model doesn't expose those. You have to go about.
That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to take a follow-up, but maybe after the talk,
Yeah, we can
I'll
do a
give you
follow-up on it.
if you can give me a card or I can give you a card, I can find out. I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out for you.
Okay. The second, another question is in terms of performance versus Graph versus EWS. Is there, which one is faster? And is the plan to switch over to stop using EWS and to go solely to Graph?
So the question here is, what is the performance characteristics? How does it differ between Microsoft Graph and EWS? And is there a plan to eventually switch over? So let me answer the second one first, and I'll get to the performance. Yes, the goal is to eventually move everybody to use Graph as the way to integrate with Exchange Online and on-premises. But we haven't announced any date for deprecating Exchange Web Services SOAP API. So this is the SOAP API. We are not shipping a whole bunch of any new APIs there, but what exists there, we're still continue to support because people have production apps running there, so we just can't turn off the switch, number one. Number two, especially for customers who have older versions, they might continue to use EWS. Going back to performance, today they're certainly comparable or based on the improvements we made for the Outlook, for Outlook on iOS and other mobile apps we have acquired and switched over to these protocols. I believe that the rest is starting to get faster or maybe much more efficient. For sure, in some of these cases whether we think when we add support in the add-ins from the add-in or when you're running on a phone, we believe we will be much more efficient also with data over the wire. Whereas with the SOAP, it's fairly verbose. So I think today the performance is comparable and it's starting to get better in the REST case. Sometimes both benefit because if the improvement make is really, really underlying, then if both benefit from it, but more and more I'm seeing the rest getting better.
But our investment is mainly
Our investment in perf and the tooling and stuff we have done here is largely on the rest, so I believe that's where we'll see a lot of the performance gains. Does that answer your question? Yes, please?
So my question is, would a people API work in a hybrid environment against a directory, and then would it target Active Directory as a directory, or still the Azure?
Got it. So the question is, in a hybrid environment with People API, would it target the on-premises Active Directory or the cloud Azure Active Directory? We require, the answer there is, it'll most likely target the Azure Active Directory for searching people. We require full directory sync between Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, not for this reason, but without a full user directory sync, Azure Active Directory wouldn't know enough about the users to be able to issue tokens or record consent from the users. And so once you have set that up, it's probably going to be faster for us to just go to Azure Active Directory and fetch the data. The exception to that rule is, today I know that if you try to fetch a user's picture, because there's an implementation detail which is that the picture is in the user's mailbox, we will go on premises and get you the picture. So that if the user took the trouble of putting the uploading an HD picture and it got stored in the on-premises mailbox, we will go fetch that from the on-premises mailbox. So that's the only exception. No, it wouldn't be, because in that case it's not calling Active Directory. In that case, the HD picture, the high resolution picture, is stored in the user's mailbox. So it's calling. So it will call. It will figure out if the mailbox has it. If the mailbox doesn't have it, then it will go to the Azure Active Directory and fetch whatever picture is on record. Now I'm making a big assumption there that the picture is synced, but we believe, I think that's the route we'll go. We'll ask people to sync it. I've gotten that. The question is, there is the scenario is to interrogate the email headers, like what you do in MIME, and Exchange Web Services support for it. We've certainly received requests for it from partners. I think by end of March we believe we should have support for it. It's something on our roadmap. We've gotten the ask. Whether we'll get it done by end of the year, I don't know yet. But for sure by end of Q1 of next year, first quarter, I believe we should have it. Go ahead. No questions? Great. Anyone else? Well, enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much for staying.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.